So that brings us then to the final topic, which does include the Worgen resolution regarding endorsements, and gets us to what apparently has decided itself to be the issue of the day or month or whatever for the party right now. And that is the National Committee's decision at its last meeting to censure Evan McMullin. And so for reasons I'm about to bring up, I'm not thrilled about talking about this, but it appears to be on everybody's mind. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about it. And this will tie into the Worgen resolution, and I suspect there's going to be additional resolutions about this as well before we're done. So hopefully this educates people about what my view is on those particular resolutions. So the NC's censure of Evan McMullin is something that I take really pretty personally. And the reason for that is, and I'm pulling this out here, this is, and I saved it, pulled it off of my car, and then taped it down here and saved it for the future. This is my McMullin 2016 bumper sticker that I had on my car. And I voted for McMullin. I volunteered for him, and he was, in some sense, a hero to me. And I was and am incredibly grateful for his 2016 campaign. But people change. And McMullin changed. And I think that that's what's getting lost, I think, in this discussion, is what happened between that wonderful 2016 campaign and his current 2022 campaign. And so here is my perspective on that. I was a volunteer, and Arkansas was one of his 11 ballot access states. There's a little group of volunteers here in Northwest Arkansas that came together. They were a great little group of people. I enjoyed working with them at the time. And after the election, and particularly given that the election resulted in Trump's victory, I strongly felt that the movement that I thought we were starting with that campaign should carry on. What I would say at the time was a conservative. I know that word sort of lost its meaning since then, but let's just say a conservative, sort of Bush 43-esque compassionate conservative campaign that was a number of things, but one of which was robustly pro-life. And so as we got into the beginning of 2017, I met with the delegates, excuse me, not the delegates, the volunteers from the local volunteers that I'd been with during the campaign. And we were sitting in the Bentonville Library in the county just north of me. And the sort of the volunteer had been my boss, had convened this meeting, and we were talking about what would happen next. And we were very much waiting for what McMullin himself would do, what national structure there would be surrounding what we ourselves would be doing. And I was already concerned by that point, because the movement was disintegrating, and at that meeting, there was talk about things were breaking up. There were going to be these different organizations. And for those of you who are familiar with these groups, great. I'm not going to go into all of them too much, but there's Stand Up Republic that was starting as sort of an advocacy, more of a sort of like a maybe a PAC or a policy advocacy organization. There was the New Conservative Movement, which was going to be maybe more campaign oriented, and so things just kind of were getting fuzzy. And 2017 started to happen, and I knew, okay, we need to contest. This is about elections. We're going to have to contest the midterm elections, and that would be forming a political party. I had heard of the American Solidarity Party by that point, but that was sort of on the back of my, sort of just the periphery of my radar. We need to have a political party. We need to have candidates. We need to have structure and bylaws and officers and internal elections and tasks. And so we met the local group of volunteers. We sort of formed ourselves into the state New Conservative Movement chapter for monthly meetings. But nothing was really happening. We weren't getting guidance. McMullin said he didn't want to immediately start a political party. So I thought, all right, well, maybe things need to start. Okay, maybe we need to get our bearings for a little bit. But he didn't do anything. And except he did involve himself in Stand Up Republic. But Stand Up Republic was just sort of a website, some advertising, and sort of focusing on, that's what was turning into Russiagate, and it wasn't really furthering a non-Trump, compassionate conservative set of principles like the campaign had been. So we have these small meetings. We talk about this idea, that idea, trying to find a candidate for our U.S. House election here in Arkansas District 3. Nothing happened. We were given a set, a statement of principles from the National New Conservative Movement. They sent us a statement of principles. And then later, someone decided to amend that, and we were given a new set of principles. There was no vote. There was no input. There was no connection between the national level and the Arkansas level. So there wasn't. There weren't delegates or representatives from Arkansas to the national infrastructure. It was just the national infrastructure just sort of existed. There weren't bylaws in either one. And so we kind of got through 2017, and then we then we came to, or we got about to the fall of 2017, and then I saw the first big problem. And this is, I think, where I think this is what some members of our party right now are missing. Suddenly, an announcement comes out of national leadership of Stand Up Republic that $250,000 is going to the special Senate election going on at that time in Alabama to hurt Roy Moore, the pro-life, well, he was the pro-life candidate, and he also had a ton of other problems, but to hurt him and to help, it was pretty clear to help Doug Jones. We had no candidate of our own, other than there actually was a McMullin voter who was a write-in candidate who might have been a good candidate for McMullin to support, but for some reason didn't, and so just just sort of pushed $250,000 of soft money in there to help Jones and hurt. And Jones was a pro-choice candidate. And so my first reaction was, well, we don't even have a candidate in that race. What? But second was, wait, where did $250,000 come from? Right? I'm just attending monthly meetings at the Bentonville Library. We have nothing. Right? We have nothing. And suddenly $250,000 shows out of nowhere and is used to help a Democrat in Alabama, in one state. What is going on here? And so at that point, I was becoming more and more suspicious that there's something more deeply going wrong here. And there wasn't a whole lot. Almost all rhetoric coming from McMullin by that point was Russiagate related. There was no bringing conservatism back from Trump type language. That was all not being said. That whole rhetoric was gone. And so it just got weirder and weirder. There was a Stand Up Republic ended up appointing a coordinator for Arkansas, which sort of felt redundant because we had our group already. But there was a SUP leader in Arkansas. I contacted that person, said, "Hey, it's great. I'm excited that you've been appointed. What's happening? What news do you bring?" And the person responded to me and said, "Oh, I don't have any news." And it turned out the person pretty much sat there for a long time. I'm to this day, I'm not really sure what the person did. But so that was happening. There was still no bylaws, still very top down. Things just we were there at the ground level, and whatever happened nationally. And eventually, in the run-up to the May 2018 election in Arkansas, the state chapter endorsed a gubernatorial candidate that I was not supporting, and so at that point I left, and nothing had been there'd been no real valuable thing that I'd been doing there anyways for some time. But over the course of 2018, it was full Russiagate, full Trump first impeachment. It was all of that. The Ukraine phone call. It was all of that. There was not a advancing of policy that had anything to do with the values of the ASP or the values of the 2016 McMullin campaign. And so we had no candidates. We had the only candidate that had run was Doug Jones, the Democrat. We supported one Democrat, and then that was it for the whole cycle. Thankfully, the United Utah Party in Utah, at least it got itself organized from some Utah people who had been involved in the movement. They actually went off and started doing something valuable of their own, which was good. And I still really want our party and UUP to have a good relationship with each other. But there wasn't what party members need to understand is by the end of 2018, McMullin, he hadn't even talked about abortion in like a year and a half, as far as maybe 2 years. By that point, he hadn't talked about much of anything. The rise of the so-called squad, he hadn't opposed that. He hadn't really pushed back on Bernie Sanders. He hadn't. There was just this Trump is bad and Russiagate is bad, and if there's conservative principles, we haven't been talking about them for a long time. So I basically gave up on McMullin by that point. I'd given him 2 years of my life. He had not really done anything, and so I waited around for about a year and a half, just trying to. I want to sort of see where the kind of. I want to sit back and see how things developed, and what I ultimately determined was what was developing was the American Solidarity Party. So I got involved in it in 2020, and it was all the things that hadn't been happening before, right? We had the bylaws, we had the meetings, we had the activity, we had the Carol Patel campaign that was going on and was exciting, and so I got involved with all of that, and didn't really look behind. And then, and meanwhile, McMullin was still not doing much of anything. At some point along the line, SUP ended up supporting one more Democratic candidate for a House seat in North Carolina, and then that was about it as far as campaign activity, soft money campaign activity. And from there, it came to the ultimate betrayal to me in that fall when McMullin announced, okay, we're going to form an alternative Republican convention, because apparently now he's back being a Republican, which was news to me because he sure hadn't looked like that for a long time. So we're having this alternative Republican convention that was at the same time as the regular 2020 Republican convention. And it gathered, and it was basically this gathering of Lincoln Project, and it was basically a lot of Joe Biden supporting kind of quasi-retired Republicans. Right? I think Christine Todd Whitman may have been there. Right? Those sorts of people. And so, but apparently now, so that was happening. And at that convention, McMullin endorsed Joe Biden. He did not endorse Carol Patel, and even though Carol Patel was the logical successor of the McMullin 2016 campaign, in my view, he did not endorse Carol Patel. He endorsed Biden-Harris. And in his speech, in McMullin's speech, it was a weird speech because he didn't mention or thank his 2016 volunteers, right? Me and the other people, right? The people that had been around him when he became famous. And I think he couldn't, is how I read that speech. I think it was the dissonance between what he now was and what he had been 4 years before was so profound that for him to bring up that he had been an anti-duopoly, grassroots conservative, he couldn't even allude back to those days. He had to be now this PAC leading, soft money broker person who is, if he's not a Democrat, then for a non-Democrat, he supports a lot of Democrats. And it was sad. It was very sad. And so at that point, I was just pretty much done with him. I had been done with him for some time, but I think at that point I sort of felt, okay, he's now unveiled himself for what he truly has, either has become or always had been, but had been masking it. I don't know. But he was now in effect a Biden Democrat, right? In fairness, he was not a Sanders Democrat, but he was basically now a Biden Democrat who was going to promote the electoral success of the Democratic Party. And so that I left that was sad, but I moved on with my life. There was a weird blip sometime last year when he sort of threw out the idea of, okay, well, maybe now we'll start our own political party. And it was sort of throwing a bone to to the non-duopoly people who I guess still supported him. And I don't know if that was sincere or insincere, if it was just one of those things where if you just sort of reminds people of the possibility from time to time, then some of them will stick around. I don't know what was happening with that. But that blip came up, didn't go anywhere. And then about a month ago, then he announced his candidacy for the Senate. And I was still, I had still enough goodwill where I was like, oh, okay, well, hope, maybe something good can come out of this. And then about a month ago, actually, let me not even go there yet. I was curious when he announced his candidacy. I was curious, what is he going to do about abortion? Because he is now so surrounded himself in the Democratic Party, whatever it is he calls himself. If he's calling himself a Democrat, Republican, an independent, whatever he's calling himself at this point, he is so in effect enmeshed in the structure of the Democratic Party. What's he going to do with abortion? Is he going to? I mean, is he going to stand up as a pro-life Democrat? Is he going to? I mean, it's sort of an independent who's in effect a Democrat but pro-life, or is what's he going to do? So I looked at his website. I was curious. Okay, what does he say here about abortion? And not too surprisingly, he said nothing. He was silent on the issue, and so I thought, okay, all right, he's what he's basically doing is he is whatever social conservative, whatever social conservatism is still is in him. He's keeping that. He's burying that deep inside himself, and the only part that he's going to let out for others to see is the that which will appeal to a Biden Democratic Party. So I was like, all right, that's fine. But since it wasn't my state, I wasn't going to be focusing on it much more. So then we get to about a month ago, the Utah, our chapter in Utah endorses McMullin. And then there was, within hours, some support within the NC for renouncing that endorsement, which for those who don't know, under our bylaws, requires it's a censure. The mechanism for that is what's called a censure. So you censure either the chapter or the candidate, and the effect of that is to have the endorsement only be that of that chapter, and it detaches the rest of the party from the endorsement. Right, so that's the mechanism. And so, at first, I spoke, and you can see all this on the Facebook group. If you go through all my comments, you'll see a lot of this. I started off being supportive of the Utah chapter and saying, look, if you guys have figured out a way to work with him, that's great. And if the Utah chapter has figured out a way for this theoretically independent campaign to work, that's great. And I initially said, look, he's pro-life. He hasn't said he's pro-choice. He appears to be pro-life. He's a pro-life person who's attempting to hide that fact as best as he can, apparently, but nonetheless, he's still a pro-life person. So I pushed back against those members who said he's pro-choice, saying let's be fair here. He's not actually said he's pro-choice. He might be trying to hope people think he's pro-choice, given the circles he moves in, but nonetheless, he's not actually said he's pro-choice. So then we get into, and you've seen or had the opportunity to see just as well as I have, then there was that initial article where he was quoted in, then he released the statement. He had that press release after the leak from the Supreme Court And then ultimately he went on MSNBC and did an interview, and then afterwards, and then from there made some additional comments as well to some local press, and then I made a statement that I still have not seen in writing. I'm familiar with some of the content of it by reports of it, but I've not actually seen it in writing, in writing. But anyway, so he makes these statements, makes a bunch of statements about abortion, and I'm not even going to get into how one interprets those statements. I think what my perspective is that he has placed himself by his choices over the last years, given the money he spent, given the people he supported, given the structure of the organizations that he's chosen to associate with himself with, and given the source of his funding, right? Because he's getting this money from somewhere, and when most of what you do as a PAC is helpful to Democrats, one would think that the money that's coming in is probably from Democrats. Then the reality is he was never in a position going into this campaign to be pro-life. For him to have come out and strongly spoken of a pro-life position was just not something that wasn't what was going to happen. That wasn't the path that he'd set for himself. That wasn't the strategy that he'd employed for the last several years. So he was either going to be pro-choice, or he was going to do what he'd done for basically the last 4 years, which was to go out of his way to not talk about abortion at all, and just either be pro-life but be quiet about it, or just be quiet about it. So between that, either the clandestine pro-life or the openly pro-choice options, he ended up sort of doing a mangled version of sort of both, I guess. I mean, and and again, you can make your you can make your own decisions about what those actual statements say, but I think what's important is for him, and particularly for him, to have won the Democratic nomination, which he did do, as a or essentially not. He didn't win the Democratic nomination. He got the Democratic Party to vote to keep its ballot line blank. Nothing about his strategy this year suggests that anybody should have been looking for a pro-life campaign. And the fact that we haven't seen a pro-life campaign is consistent with that. And so I don't want to hear this, oh, well, if you take this sentence here and you put it up against this, and if you merge a couple pieces of the different statements together, you have a pro-life campaign. That is inconsistent with his strategy now for going on 6 years. That all of that ended after the 2016 campaign. And so that is the context in which we should judge him. And I think that the reality is that the Utah chapter couldn't get us to a place that would work. And there were some different options, but one might have been to for the Utah chapter to openly go out there and say he is pro-choice, but we support him because we want to hang the Senate, or we don't like Mike Lee, or what, but just be upfront about what we're doing. We're going to side with a pro-choice candidate in the name of X other goal. Okay, that was one possibility. That's not what the Utah chapter chose to do. Another one was to work out something where we could say he was pro-life, while he himself was just sort of being quiet about it, so that we could at least protect ourselves. But that by the time he got done saying all of those statements, that wasn't an option either. And so in the end, the NC needed to walk the rest of the country away from this mess. And so I certainly support what the NC did. And the fact that it did it unanimously is a big deal, right? That's a fairly diverse group of, the 9 are a fairly diverse group of people. And the fact that they got that there with a unanimous vote, I think indicates that there's a broad swath of the party that really felt that we needed to get off that bus, and that things were just getting worse. And I agree with that. In terms of, let's talk about subsidiarity, which has come up a lot. Does the principle of subsidiarity require the NC to show deference, and if so, how much deference, to a state party when it comes to its endorsements? Here's what I would say. For purposes of McMullin, that question doesn't really matter. And here's why. Because the Utah chapter never articulated, as far as I know, its reasons for the endorsement in subsidiarity related, with a subsidiarity related rationale. And in fact, someone who actually was sort of trying to do that at the beginning, to try and get some sort of arrangement here that would work, was me. I made a post that said, look, there are local circumstances in Utah that we need to let Utahns care about. That there is the UUP, which and most other states don't have a dynamic where there's another party that has fairly similar values to ours at the state level that's fairly active and organized. So our Utah chapter has to make special considerations about how to deal with the UUP. Second, obviously in 2016, Utah had the highest non-duopoly presidential vote in the country. And actually not just in the country that year, but in any state ever in the previous about 20 years. So there's an argument to be made that, okay, Utah needs to be able to pay close attention to, needs to be able to deal with that dynamic in ways that other members around the country are just not prepared to understand how to deal with that. But the Utah chapter never really went that route. What it really did was just lay out McMullin's statements and interpret them in a particular way, and not in a way that required any sort of subsidiarity-based deference, right? The Utah chapter never said anything like, so like said nothing, never said, so Utahns have a vernacular, we have some slang, and some of the words McMullin was using are come from that slang, and so outsiders are not going to really understand the nuance of some of what he was saying. So trust us, when you actually understand the local terms, what he said was okay, right? There was never an argument like that, and that's what's necessary for subsidiarity to work. For subsidiarity to work, you have to say, okay, I'm here and you're there, and there's something about there as opposed to here that enables you to do things, have vantage points on things, whatever, that lets you be better at something than I am. But that's really the essence of subsidiarity, as far as I understand it. And I didn't feel that argument was ever made. When we're sitting there reading the press release, when we're sitting there looking at the video from MSNBC or reading the article on MSNBC, which is a national news service. It was not broadcast to Utahns. It was broadcast to the country. I'm not seeing anything in there that makes me say, if only I was a Utahn, then I understand what I'm looking at right now. So for that reason, I don't think this is really a subsidiarity. I don't think it implicates subsidiarity, really. It could have. It had people made different arguments than they did, but I think as things went, that's the way it is. So finally, and I'm glad I got all this off my chest, and hopefully I won't have to say a whole lot about this further, but in terms of endorsement reform, I think I want to be cautious about endorsement reform, because I don't think we should be making a bunch of resolutions just geared around this one incident just because it's the most recent, right? We have a 12 calendar month. I don't think conventions should just be about what happened in May. So we've never had a problem like this before in my 2 years here. There have been two censures, and the other one was the one at the last meeting for the California guy. I don't even think that one counts. That's a very unusual circumstance that appears to be sort of a mutual censure in the fact that nobody in California or elsewhere that I know of has opposed the censure. So which I don't know then why there wasn't just a rescission of the endorsement. But so that's a weird situation that I think probably has no precedential value. And I don't think that McMullin has much precedential value either, because I just think that the history that I've walked through there, it's so unique. It's so unique to him. And, we're going to have very few candidates in the future who are even going to be able to say, okay, how did you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in your PAC in the last few years, right? That's not even going to be a question that we're going to be able to ask of most of the people that we're thinking about endorsing, right? So there's a lot of this that I think is I don't think we should be building a lot of changes based on just this one incident. But if there's little modifications here and there, I'm happy to look at them. I do want to keep some connection between the national party and the state parties. So I don't want, which I think is the thrust of the Worgen resolution, if I'm recalling it right, is just to disconnect the two, just say that a state endorsement is never a national endorsement. I think that's disconcerting because, as a practical matter, the question is more not what the bylaws say, but what the public perception is. And I'm not sure that we can mold the public perception with that level of nuance. Right? If a state makes a terrible endorsement, is the public nationwide going to go, oh, don't worry, but that's just that state because ASB's policy is that it's just that state? I doubt that there's that going to be that level of nuance. So I do want to keep some accountability. I think that the NC should be there still to provide some level of accountability. But again, I'm open to some thoughts and tweaks and changes. But again, this is not something that warrants a big review. And I think that the fact that we've already spent as much time on it as we have is unfortunate. I think that the fact that we just got done with our debate, my debate today, which thankfully didn't talk about it too much, but the Friday debates were, oh my gosh, I think about a third of both debates were about this. Like, that's a lot. So I should just conclude with a couple things here. And one is, there's now this discussion about, and I hope it's a small minority of members that are talking about this. I can't entirely tell, but about how the McMullin censure is it's so the onset of a purge or marginalization of members who have slight differences about abortion, that members are going to be pushed out or pushed aside for particular beliefs about ectopic pregnancy or rape exceptions. And I think that is just really misreading the room of what's going on, both within the NC and in the overall dynamic. I don't think that this was really even, in some senses, I don't even think this situation was about abortion. I think this was just about a man who, for the reasons that I walked through just now, doesn't just wasn't trustworthy. He wasn't a good partner. He wasn't a good coalition member, ally. He was just sort of all over the place and doing things that were not sufficiently consistent or sufficiently rooted in his actual beliefs. That were so calculated in multiple layers of his political needs to appease the people he's around and the people that are giving him money, that it just wasn't, maintaining that relationship with him just proved to be not worth it. And so anyone who, I think, reads out of this that this was a position on details of an abortion position, and that member or that group of members may be next for the whatever form of chopping block is next, is I don't think that that's the case. And I would urge everybody, particularly those who are talking about, and I think it's just a few of them, I hope it's just a few of them, who are talking about leaving the party, just don't. Let's see how this plays out. This has not happened to anyone we've had candidates, we've had state chapters, this has not happened to anyone else in the 2 years that I've been in this party. And so let's give it some time, I would say, to those people. Give it some time and see how this goes. This is not, I think this was just such an unusual situation for the reasons I've described, that to treat it as any sort of bellwether is ill-advised. And so finally, I will say that in that spirit of what I just said, I do wish, and this is where there may be some restructuring of the language of the bylaws that maybe there's a little adding some tweaks in there on this point may be worthwhile. But the one thing I am that I would have done differently than the NC is that there are 2 grounds for censure under the bylaws. There's a problem with character, and then there's a pronounced disagreement with the policies of the party. And basically, the NC went down the second road of saying that this is a disagreement about policy. I don't think that's the best way to put it. I think this is a character issue. I just think this was not someone who was prepared to have the kind of candor with us that a partnership requires, and I think that his behavior over the last month reflects that. And I mean, I have said previously that I believe he lied to us, and I do think that's correct. But again, you can interpret his statements somewhat differently than that. But at a minimum, he did not reflect the moral character necessary to have a partnership with us. And by moral character, I'm talking about like just stuff like consistency and candor and giving us notice, giving us a warning before he goes on to national television to say something that clearly some of us found surprising and got thrown off by. And so it's just those things. And so I would have just narrowed it to that and had that be the basis for the censure. But that's my only difference with the NC on that. And again, I think it did a good job. So that concludes my was in effect the second part of my statement here. And I encourage you, if you are in South Region, to vote, put me on, rank me as high on your ballot as possible. And again, if you have any questions for me, first name, last name at gmail.com is perfectly fine way to reach me. And I wish everybody the best in the remainder of this campaign here. And good luck to everybody.